Apache woman left for wolves. Cowboys daring rescue forges an uneasy pact. The cold wind blew across the open land as the first light of dawn touched the hills. The land was wide and empty, stretching as far as the eye could see. Small patches of grass, trees, and rivers marked the territory, but mostly it was open space, where danger could come without warning. In this vast wilderness, an Apache woman moved carefully. She knew the land, its hidden paths, and the animals that roamed it, but she also understood that the frontier was changing. Settlers were coming closer every year, and their presence made life harder for her people. The balance between nature and survival was delicate, and she always felt the weight of it. That morning, she had decided to leave early. She had a small pack with essentials, food, water, and blankets, and a few belongings from her home that reminded her of family and tradition. Her steps were steady, careful, and silent. The world around her was waking slowly. Birds began to sing, and a thin layer of frost shimmered on the grass. She paused for a moment, looking at the horizon. The rising sun painted the sky with soft colors, but the beauty did not calm her worries. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the land itself held its breath. She did not know that today would change her life forever. As she moved further into the hills, she noticed tracks in the soft ground. Animal tracks, foxes, deer, maybe even a wolf, crossed her path. She studied them carefully. The forest was alive with movement, and she knew which creatures were dangerous and which were not. She had learned this skill from her elders. Her people had survived for generations by understanding nature deeply, reading every sign the land gave. Still, something felt different this morning. There was a silence in places where there should have been noise, and the wind carried a strange, distant howl that made her pause. It was a warning she could not ignore. Hours passed as she moved carefully, following the safest paths she knew. She crossed small streams and climbed rocky hills, always alert. She kept thinking about her family and her people, wondering how they would feel if she did not return soon. She also thought about the strangers moving into the land. Some of them had good intentions, but many brought danger, fear, and conflict. She did not trust easily. She had seen the consequences of misunderstanding, and the frontier was unforgiving to anyone who made a mistake. Around midday, she found a small clearing and decided to rest. She unpacked a small bundle and ate quietly, always keeping her senses sharp. She listened to the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of animals. It was a beautiful place, yet it felt isolated. She realized that she was farther from home than she had expected. The sun was high and the shadows were short, making it hard to judge the safest direction to continue. She decided to wait for a while and observe. Survival was not only about moving quickly, it was about knowing when to act and when to be patient. As the afternoon approached, she noticed dark clouds forming in the sky. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something else she could not identify. The land changed instantly. What had seemed safe in the morning now felt unpredictable. The ground became slippery, and hidden rocks made every step risky. She pressed on, trying to find shelter before the storm arrived. She moved faster now, but still carefully, balancing urgency with caution. Each movement had to be deliberate. She could not afford a mistake. Suddenly, she felt a disturbance in the air, a sense that she was not alone. The feeling was subtle at first, but it grew stronger. She stopped and looked around. There were no humans in sight, only the trees, the hills, and the distant roar of the wind. Still, her instincts told her that she should be wary. She had learned to trust her intuition. It had saved her many times. She decided to change direction slightly, moving toward a thicker part of the forest, where she could hide if needed. Every step was careful, every sound measured. Time passed quickly, and the storm began to fall. Rain came in cold sheets, soaking the ground and her clothes. She struggled through mud and slippery rocks, trying to keep moving. Visibility was poor, and the forest looked different in the rain. She realized she had lost her bearings. Paths she had taken before seemed unfamiliar, and landmarks she depended on were hidden. Fear began to rise in her chest, but she did not let it take over. She stopped briefly under a large tree, shaking the water from her pack and trying to think clearly.
She needed a plan. Panic could make her make dangerous decisions.
By evening, the rain had slowed, but the forest was now dark and shadowed. She moved cautiously, knowing she had to find a safe place to rest. Her body ached, and exhaustion threatened to slow her down. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her thoughts drifted to home. She wished she had not traveled so far, but she also knew that she could not turn back without risking more danger. Her survival depended on determination, knowledge, and careful choices. She was aware that one wrong step could lead to serious injury or worse. When night fell, she finally found a small cave hidden among the rocks. It was not ideal, but it offered shelter from the cold wind and potential predators. She crawled inside, carefully arranging her pack to stay dry. She listened to the forest outside, the wind, the distant howl of wolves, the drip of rain from the trees. She knew she was vulnerable, but she also knew she could survive the night. She made a small fire using dry twigs she had collected earlier. The warmth offered comfort, though the flames were small and cautious, hidden to avoid attracting attention. In the flickering light, she thought about the day's events, replaying each step and decision. She realized how easily someone could disappear in this land, leaving no trace behind. As she drifted into a restless sleep, she dreamed of her family and her people. She thought about the stories her elders told, stories of survival, bravery, and the spirits of the land. Those stories had guided her, giving her knowledge and courage. She felt connected to her ancestors, as if their strength was flowing through her. Yet she also felt the weight of solitude. In this vast wilderness, she was completely alone, surrounded by beauty and danger at the same time. She knew the morning would bring new challenges, but she also knew she had the ability to face them. She was strong, resourceful, and determined. The first signs of dawn crept into the cave. Light filtered through cracks in the rocks, revealing the damp forest outside. She woke, stiff and tired, but alert. Her instincts immediately scanned the surroundings. The forest was quiet, but she knew it would not stay that way for long. Animals would move, and humans could appear unexpectedly. She packed her belongings carefully, checking her supplies. Every item mattered in a place like this. She stepped outside, the wet grass cold beneath her feet, and looked at the horizon. She knew that the next part of her journey would be the most dangerous. She had survived the night, but the challenges ahead were unknown and possibly greater than anything she had faced. Somewhere in the distance, people began to notice her absence. Back home, whispers spread quickly. Friends and family grew worried. The Apache community discussed where she could be, how far she might have traveled, and what dangers she faced. The settlers nearby also noticed that someone had been moving through the land. Stories began to mix with fear, and uncertainty grew. No one knew exactly what had happened, only that the woman had disappeared into a wilderness that was vast, cold, and unforgiving. The mystery of her disappearance added tension to the frontier, reminding everyone that survival required courage, skill, and a little bit of luck. By the time the sun was fully up, She had already covered several more miles. Her mind was focused, her senses sharp. She remembered the lessons taught by her elders. Always respect the land, watch the animals, and trust your instincts. Each step carried her further from home, but also closer to survival. The world around her was beautiful, harsh, and alive. Every sound, every movement, every shadow mattered. She was not just walking through the land. She was reading it, understanding it, and becoming part of its story. Her journey had begun in fear and uncertainty, but it was also filled with courage, wisdom, and determination. The news of the Apache woman's disappearance spread quickly through the nearby settlements. People whispered about her, some with concern, others with suspicion. Many assumed she was lost forever, swallowed by the wilderness, or taken by danger. Yet, among the settlers and cowboys, there was one man who could not let the story rest in silence. He was a lone cowboy, rugged and experienced, someone who knew the land like the back of his hand. He had faced storms, wild animals, and the unpredictable nature of the frontier many times. Still, this situation was different. It was not just about survival. It was about doing what was right. The cowboy had heard the stories while at the local trading post. Settlers described the woman's courage and her deep knowledge of the land. They spoke of how she had vanished without a trace, leaving only faint tracks that disappeared into the wilderness. Most of the men shrugged, deciding it was someone else's problem. But the cowboy could not ignore it. Something about the story touched him deeply. He did not know the woman personally, but he understood the danger she faced. The wilderness was unforgiving, and anyone left alone for too long could be lost forever. He made a decision that surprised even himself. He would find her. He prepared carefully for the journey. Unlike some who would rush into danger blindly, he knew that the land required respect and knowledge. He packed food, blankets, a few basic tools, and his trusted rifle, not to harm, but to protect. He also carried a small journal in which he wrote notes about the land, directions, and observations. This was a habit he had developed over years of traveling alone. Every mark mattered, every trail had meaning, and every detail could make the difference between life and death. He left the settlement quietly, without fanfare, knowing that this would be a long and uncertain journey. As he entered the wilderness, he noticed the signs that the woman had left behind: footprints in the soft soil, disturbed branches, and the occasional mark on a rock guided him. The tracks were faint, and the rain from the previous night had partially washed them away, but he followed them carefully, step by step. He was not in a hurry. He knew that rushing could lead him astray or into danger. His eyes scanned every inch of the ground, and his ears listened to every sound. The forest, the hills, and the rivers all held secrets, and he was learning to read them. Days passed, and the cowboy moved deeper into the wilderness. Each day brought new challenges. Streams were swollen with melted snow, and some paths had turned into slippery mud. Wolves and other wild animals were near, their howls echoing in the night. He respected them, giving them space, understanding that the land belonged to them as much as it did to humans. He also faced hunger and exhaustion, eating sparingly and resting whenever it was safe. Yet he never lost hope. The thought of the woman, alone and vulnerable, kept him moving. He imagined her strength, her knowledge, and her determination to survive, and it inspired him to keep going. Along the way, he found small clues about her life and journey: a piece of cloth caught on a branch, a bundle of firewood arranged carefully, and footprints that suggested careful planning. These small signs gave him hope and confidence. They told him that she was alive and that she had the skills to survive. He also realized that he could learn from her. Even though he was experienced, There were details in the wilderness that only someone with her background would notice. He began to see the land through her eyes, the hidden paths, the safe places to drink water, and the areas where danger was greatest. As he moved, he also thought about the history of the land and its people. He remembered stories he had heard from both settlers and the Apache community. There was tension, fear, and misunderstanding between them, but there was also a deep respect for survival, courage, and knowledge. He knew that finding her was not just about rescuing one person. It was about bridging a gap, even if just a small one. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just for her, but for the trust and connection between the worlds he was entering. The wilderness tested him in unexpected ways. He faced storms that drenched him, wild animals that watched him from a distance, and nights so cold that he could barely move. At one point, he became lost in a thick forest, the trees all looking alike and the tracks disappearing in the mud. Panic tried to creep in, but he pushed it away, relying on his knowledge, intuition, and patience. He climbed a hill and looked at the horizon, finding landmarks that guided him back to the trail. Every success, no matter how small, strengthened his determination. One evening, as the sun began to set, he noticed smoke rising in the distance. He paused, hiding behind rocks, and observed carefully. The smoke was faint but steady. He knew it could be a fire made by the woman. Excitement and relief surged through him, but he remained cautious. The wilderness was full of surprises, and he could not take unnecessary risks. He approached slowly, staying hidden, observing the surroundings. The signs matched what he had been following: the disturbed ground, careful arrangement, and a faint trail of footprints. He was close. The next morning, he found her camp. It was small, simple, and perfectly adapted to the environment. She had built a fire pit, arranged a few blankets, and left small signs of her presence. Yet, she was not there. He searched carefully, knowing she could be nearby, moving through the forest for water or food. His eyes scanned every tree, every shadow, and every sound. Hours passed, but he did not give up. He had faced similar challenges before, and he knew patience was as important as speed. He trusted that she was alive, and that he would find her if he remained alert and careful. When he finally saw her, she was crouched near a stream gathering water. The sunlight hit her face, showing determination, focus, and strength. She noticed him, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Neither moved, both cautious and aware of the tension between them. He did not want to frighten her, and she did not want to be captured or controlled. Their eyes communicated understanding and caution. He spoke softly, showing respect, and she responded carefully. Words were few, but the message was clear. Help, but respect, was offered. The first meeting was delicate. She did not fully trust him, and he understood that. She had survived alone for days, relying on her skills and knowledge. She knew that trust was earned, not given. The cowboy knew that forcing her to follow him could be dangerous. He gave her space, demonstrating that his intentions were honest. Slowly, through small gestures and careful communication, a connection began to form. They were not yet friends, but they were allies, bound by the shared goal of survival in a harsh and unforgiving wilderness. Over the next few days, they moved together cautiously. She led him through paths only she knew, and he followed with respect, observing and learning. He noticed how she read the signs of the land, predicted changes in weather, and identified safe spots to rest. He shared what he could about his knowledge, offering guidance on navigation and protection from danger. They became a team, each learning from the other. The tension between them remained, but a sense of mutual respect grew. The wilderness was no longer a solitary challenge. It became a shared journey. As they traveled, the cowboy began to understand the depth of her world. He saw how her culture, knowledge, and experience shaped her decisions. He realized that her strength was not just physical, but also mental and spiritual. She had survived because she respected the land, understood its dangers, and trusted her instincts. He learned that true courage was not reckless bravery, but careful, informed action. Each day reinforced his admiration and respect for her, and he hoped she could see that his intentions were honorable. They faced every obstacle together, the bond growing, even if silently, with each passing mile. By the time they reached a small clearing after days of careful travel, both felt the weight of the journey. The cowboy had followed her tracks, protected her from dangers, and shown patience, while she had guided him, trusted him cautiously, and survived despite immense challenges. They stopped to rest, understanding that the journey was not yet over. The bond formed through struggle and mutual respect was fragile but important. They were no longer strangers. They were partners in survival, though the future remained uncertain. Trust had begun to grow in the wilderness, but the world outside was unpredictable, and challenges still awaited them. The wilderness stretched endlessly before them, dark and quiet in the early morning. The Apache woman led the way carefully, her eyes scanning the trees, the rocks, and the soft earth for any sign of danger. The cowboy followed closely, aware that one wrong step could spell disaster. Despite the distance they had already traveled, the land still held surprises. The forest was alive with subtle movements, leaves rustling, small animals scurrying, and the distant howls of wolves echoing through the hills. Each sound reminded them that they were not alone, and that survival depended on attention, patience, and respect. The woman had lived closely with the wilderness for many years. She knew which animals were dangerous, which areas provided safe water, and how to move silently through forests without drawing attention. Even so, the challenge of traveling with another person was new. She had to teach him to be quiet, careful, and observant, while also trusting him enough to follow her guidance. The cowboy, experienced though he was, quickly realized that he had much to learn. He had survived storms, wild animals, and difficult trails, but her knowledge of the land was deeper, almost instinctual. Watching her move through the forest, he understood that survival was an art, a combination of skill, patience, and connection to the land. By late morning, they reached a small valley surrounded by rocky hills. The woman pointed toward a shallow stream hidden by tall grass. "Water here is safe," she said softly. He nodded, lowering his canteen and drinking carefully, grateful for her guidance. The water was cold and clear, refreshing after the long journey. She observed him silently, noting how he handled himself, how he moved, and how he reacted to the wilderness around him. Her trust grew slowly, not out of friendship, but respect. She had survived alone for days, and she understood the value of caution. The cowboy sensed this unspoken judgment and made sure every action reflected care and awareness. As they continued, the sound of distant howls grew louder. Wolves, the unseen rulers of these hills, were nearby. She stopped abruptly, signaling him to freeze. The cowboy strained his eyes through the trees. He could see them now, shadows moving among rocks and trees, sleek and silent, observing them from a distance. He instinctively reached for his rifle, but hesitated when she placed a firm hand on his arm. "No," she whispered. "They are watching, not attacking. Respect them, or you will provoke them." He lowered the rifle slowly, realizing that in this land, aggression invited danger, while caution and understanding could ensure safety. The wolves were not mindless killers. They were creatures of instinct, deeply connected to the wilderness. Hours passed as they navigated carefully around rocky slopes and thick underbrush. The wolves continued to follow at a distance, their presence a constant reminder that they were part of a living, breathing wilderness. The woman moved deliberately, leaving no traces behind. She knew how to avoid encounters that could end badly, how to stay calm, and how to read subtle signs in the environment. The cowboy observed everything, learning not just from her actions but also from the silence between movements. The quiet was powerful, a teacher in itself. The forest spoke in small details, the pattern of broken branches, the angle of fallen leaves, and the distant call of an unseen bird. Each sound carried meaning. By afternoon, they reached a small, rocky overhang that provided shelter. She made a small fire with dry twigs she had carried carefully, keeping it low so that smoke would not attract attention. He watched as she arranged their supplies, noting the efficiency and care in every movement. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were precise, teaching him how to read the land, how to conserve energy, and how to remain alert without panic. Her methods were subtle but effective, combining patience, observation, and deep understanding. He realized that her strength was not only in her knowledge, but also in her calmness and ability to stay composed under pressure. As night fell, the forest grew darker and more alive with sounds. The wolves had moved closer, circling at a distance. They were neither aggressive nor curious. They were cautious, studying the humans with intelligence and instinct. The woman whispered instructions to the cowboy, guiding him to move quietly and avoid drawing attention. They sat near the small fire, listening to the night around them. Every crackle of a branch, every distant howl, and every rustle of leaves was carefully observed. The cowboy understood that this was more than survival. It was a lesson in coexistence. The wilderness could be dangerous, but it could also teach respect, patience, and understanding. During the night, the woman shared stories of her past. She spoke of her family, her people, and the traditions that had guided her life. She told him about the wisdom passed down through generations, the knowledge of plants, the reading of tracks, and the understanding of animal behavior. The cowboy listened, realizing that these stories were not just history, but tools for survival. Her words painted pictures of a world that he had only partially understood. He saw the wilderness differently now, not just as land to cross or dangers to avoid, but as a living, connected world with rules, signs, and balance. The night passed slowly, filled with quiet tension and careful observation. Wolves approached near the edge of their shelter, their eyes reflecting the firelight. She remained calm, speaking softly and guiding the cowboy to stay still. Their movements were deliberate, controlled, and synchronized. He had learned to trust her instincts, to follow her lead, and to understand that aggression would bring harm. The wolves eventually moved away, fading into the shadows as silently as they had appeared. The cowboy felt a mix of awe and respect. These creatures, wild and free, were as much rulers of the land as humans, and their presence reminded him of the delicate balance that survival demanded. By morning, they resumed their journey. The woman taught the cowboy how to move quietly, how to read the subtle signs of animal behavior, and how to find safe food and water. She showed him small tricks of the wilderness, how to find fresh water in unexpected places, how to avoid dangerous slopes, and how to use rocks and trees for protection. He absorbed each lesson eagerly, grateful for her guidance. The trust between them had grown, fragile but meaningful, built on shared survival and mutual respect. They were no longer strangers. They were partners, learning from one another as they moved through a challenging and unforgiving environment. As the sun climbed higher, the woman led them to a hidden valley surrounded by high rocks. The valley was calm, almost serene, with a small stream running through it and patches of edible plants along the edges. She explained which plants were safe to eat and how to avoid poisonous ones. She showed him where to rest without leaving traces, how to create simple but effective shelters, and how to remain hidden from potential threats. The cowboy marveled at her skill, realizing that her survival depended not only on strength and courage, but also on wisdom, observation, and patience. Every step in the wilderness required knowledge, respect, and careful planning. During the day, they encountered more wolves, but each interaction was cautious and controlled. The woman taught the cowboy to move slowly, make no sudden gestures, and maintain calm confidence. The wolves observed but never attacked, respecting the humans who respected them. He realized that survival was not about defeating nature, but about understanding it, respecting it, and finding a way to exist alongside it. The lessons he learned were profound, shaping not only his skills but also his perspective on the wilderness, life, and the delicate relationships that connected all living beings. By evening, they reached a small cave near the stream, providing shelter from wind and potential storms. She made another small fire, and they settled in. The cowboy watched her move with quiet efficiency, gathering twigs, arranging supplies, and observing the surroundings. She spoke of her plans, pointing out safe areas to rest and paths to follow in the morning. He listened carefully, recognizing that her strength was a combination of knowledge, patience, and respect for the land. Each lesson reinforced the bond between them, built on trust, caution, and the shared goal of surviving the wilderness together. The night fell, colder than the previous one. Wolves circled at a distance, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The woman whispered instructions to the cowboy, guiding him through movements and positions that would keep them safe. The fire flickered low, casting shadows across the cave walls. They sat quietly, observing the forest, listening to every sound, and remaining alert. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her skills, her calmness, and her ability to survive in a world that demanded constant vigilance. He realized that the wilderness had become their teacher, and survival depended on the lessons they both learned together. As dawn approached, the cowboy watched her stand near the cave entrance, surveying the forest with sharp eyes and careful movements. He knew that she had taught him more in these days than he could have imagined. The wolves had been part of their journey, silent observers, reminding them of the delicate balance between danger and respect. He understood that survival was not about conquest or force, but about awareness, patience, and cooperation. Together, they prepared to continue their journey, stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land than when they had first met. The lessons of the wilderness had bonded them, creating a fragile but important alliance. The morning air was crisp as the cowboy and the Apache woman prepared to leave the hidden valley. The wolves were gone, but their presence lingered in memory, reminding both travelers of the delicate balance of the wilderness. Each step they took now carried new urgency. They had survived the nights, learned from each other, and faced dangers together. But the journey back to the settlements was not simple. The forest they had crossed before now seemed stranger, filled with shadows that shifted unnaturally, and every sound made them pause. The woman led the way carefully, her instincts guiding them around hidden traps, fallen trees, and tricky terrain. The cowboy followed closely, noting every small sign: the broken branches, the faint footprints in the mud, the subtle changes in the wind. He had learned much from her in the last few days. He understood that moving too fast or carelessly could bring disaster. Even the most minor misstep in these forests could mean injury or getting lost. They paused frequently, checking the surroundings and deciding the safest path forward. While they had survived alone in the wilderness before, now their fates were intertwined. They depended on each other, and both understood the weight of that responsibility. By late morning, they reached a shallow river. The water was swift, glinting under the sun, and the rocks were slippery. The woman stepped carefully across first, testing the footing. She guided the cowboy over the rocks, teaching him to balance and watch every movement. He listened carefully, realizing that survival depended not only on strength and courage, but also on caution and observation. For a moment they stopped at the riverbank, resting and drinking the cold, clear water. Silence surrounded them, broken only by the rushing river. It was a rare moment of peace, but both knew it would be short-lived. Danger could be near at any moment. The land ahead was less familiar. They entered a dense thicket where paths were hidden and trails unclear. The woman's eyes scanned every shadow and every movement in the trees. She noticed subtle changes in the soil, the way animals had disturbed the underbrush, and the faint tracks of humans who had passed before. Her experience allowed them to move safely, but it was slow work. Every hour felt heavier than the last. The cowboy, though strong and determined, began to feel fatigue. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the weight of his supplies pulled at his shoulders. Still, he did not complain. He knew that the woman's survival depended on him as much as his depended on her. Around midday they heard voices in the distance. Both froze immediately, crouching behind rocks. Settlers and possibly some men who did not understand the woman's presence in these lands were nearby. The woman whispered instructions, urging silence and stillness. They waited, breath held, listening carefully. The voices moved slowly, some laughing, others speaking in low tones. They were unaware of the travelers hidden nearby. The woman guided the cowboy to a better hiding spot, and together they waited until the danger passed. This close encounter reminded both of them that the wilderness was not the only challenge. The world outside, people, fear, and misunderstanding was just as dangerous. As afternoon turned to evening, the journey grew more difficult. Rain began to fall, cold and steady, turning the ground to mud and making paths slippery. They moved cautiously, helping each other over rocks and fallen logs. The woman's knowledge of safe paths kept them from serious injury, but the weather tested their endurance. They found a small hollow under a large tree to rest, sharing food and water sparingly. The cowboy admired her resilience, realizing that she had survived alone for days in harsher conditions. He had learned to respect her patience, courage, and determination. She in turn noticed his growing understanding and willingness to follow her guidance. Trust had deepened, forged in shared struggle. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the forest damp and quiet. The moon rose, casting pale light over the wet ground. Wolves howled in the distance, and the woman paused to listen. "They are still near," she said softly, "but they will not harm us if we do not harm them." The cowboy nodded, realizing how much he had learned from her guidance. Their relationship had grown from cautious partnership to mutual reliance. Each step they took was informed by shared knowledge and careful observation. The forest, which had seemed dangerous and unpredictable at first, now felt like a place they could navigate together, if they remained alert and respected its rules. As they moved on, signs of human activity became more frequent. Abandoned camps, old trails, and small settlements appeared in the distance. Each sight brought mixed feelings. The woman was cautious, knowing that not everyone would understand her presence in these lands. The cowboy was tense, aware that people might react unpredictably. They had faced natural dangers together, but the social dangers, the reactions of settlers and others, added a new layer of risk. Every decision, every interaction, could determine whether their journey ended in safety or conflict. Late into the evening, they reached a small clearing. It was open, offering little cover, and the woman suggested they rest briefly before continuing. She arranged a small fire carefully, keeping it low and hidden. They shared a simple meal, and the cowboy noticed how methodical she was, her movements precise, her knowledge of survival refined. He realized that even in ordinary tasks, her skill made life easier, safer, and more efficient. Each lesson she taught him reinforced the understanding that survival was as much about wisdom as it was about courage. During the night, the woman spoke of her fears and hopes. She told him about her family and the traditions that had guided her people for generations. She explained how survival depended on understanding the land, respecting its creatures, and observing every small detail. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that her strength came from experience and connection to the world around her. He began to see the land in a new way, noticing subtle changes in terrain, the behavior of animals, and the signs of approaching weather. Her guidance was shaping him, teaching patience, awareness, and respect. The next morning, they encountered more challenges. Fallen trees blocked their path, and small streams overflowed with recent rain. The woman led the cowboy carefully around obstacles, showing him how to test the ground, balance, and move silently. The wilderness was relentless, but they were persistent. Every mile tested their endurance, patience, and trust in each other. The cowboy found himself thinking about the dangers they had already faced and the ones that still lay ahead. He realized that survival depended on cooperation, respect, and careful observation, a lesson he would not forget. As the day wore on, signs of the settlements grew clearer. They could see distant smoke and hear faint voices. Relief was tempered with caution. The woman had taught him to respect the land, but now they had to navigate the people who lived nearby. They knew that misunderstandings could quickly turn dangerous. She remained calm, alert, and thoughtful, guiding him in ways that balanced caution with progress. The cowboy appreciated her leadership, understanding that trust was earned in every choice, every movement, and every decision. By evening, they reached the outskirts of a small settlement. The woman moved slowly, aware that she would be entering a world full of unknown reactions. The cowboy stayed close, providing support while respecting her space. Their journey through the wilderness had strengthened both of them. They had survived storms, rivers, slippery paths, and distant threats from animals and people alike. The shared experiences had created a fragile but meaningful bond. Trust had grown, respect had deepened, and their awareness of danger had sharpened. As they entered the settlement, reactions were immediate. Some people were curious, others suspicious. Whispers spread quickly as the woman and the cowboy appeared from the forest. The woman remained calm, her eyes cautious, assessing each reaction. The cowboy stayed near her, ready to protect, but careful not to alarm anyone. Old tensions between settlers and the Apache people were present, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Yet their survival and shared journey commanded attention. People could not ignore the courage, skill, and determination they had demonstrated. By nightfall, they had found a safe place to rest in the settlement. The woman remained alert but calm, knowing that the wilderness had prepared her for challenges that were both natural and human. The cowboy understood that their journey had changed them. They had learned from each other, relied on each other, and survived together. The return journey had tested their patience, endurance, and trust, preparing them for the new challenges that awaited. Together they had faced the wilderness, respected its dangers, and emerged stronger, ready to face the world beyond the forest. The Apache woman and the cowboy walked slowly into the main clearing of the settlement, the sunlight fading behind the hills. Dust rose gently from the path as they moved, and the villagers noticed them immediately. Some froze in surprise, Others whispered to neighbors, and a few stepped back in caution. The woman's face was calm, her posture steady, but her eyes remained alert. She had survived countless dangers in the wilderness, and she knew that the people here could be just as unpredictable. The cowboy stayed close, ready to support her if needed, but he moved with respect, giving her space to lead the interaction. Children peered curiously from behind doors and fences, and adults watched silently, unsure what to make of the sudden appearance. Many had heard rumors of a lost woman surviving in the wilderness, and seeing her alive confirmed the stories. Yet, along with relief, came suspicion. They did not know her, and they did not know the cowboy's intentions. The air was thick with tension as people tried to understand what had happened. Whispers carried through the crowd. Is she safe? Was anyone hurt? "Who brought her back?" the woman observed carefully, noting who looked friendly, who looked wary, and who might be a threat. The cowboy spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "She is safe," he said. "She survived in the forest with skill and courage. I only followed her tracks to make sure she could return." His words were simple, honest, and respectful. Some villagers nodded slowly, beginning to relax, while others still kept a careful distance. The woman spoke next, her voice quiet but clear. She thanked the people who had been concerned for her, and explained that her journey through the wilderness had been difficult, but she had learned much. She described how she had survived, how she had avoided danger, and how she had relied on her knowledge of the land. As she spoke, some villagers began to see her bravery and intelligence. They realized that she had faced challenges many could not imagine, and had survived alone in the wilderness. Their admiration grew quietly, even among those who were skeptical at first. The cowboy continued to explain that their journey had required trust and cooperation, and that respect for the land, the animals, and each other had kept them safe. He emphasized that survival was not just about strength, but about patience, wisdom, and careful decisions. Slowly, the tension in the clearing began to ease, though caution still lingered in many eyes. Elders of the community stepped forward, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. They had heard stories of her courage, but seeing her in person brought new understanding. The woman spoke respectfully to them, acknowledging their wisdom and traditions. She explained that she had survived through careful observation, knowledge of the wilderness, and calm patience. She emphasized that the land demanded respect, and that the wilderness was a teacher for those willing to learn. The elders listened attentively, realizing that her survival was a testament not only to her courage, but also to her intelligence and understanding of the world around her. Some settlers who had previously been suspicious began to approach cautiously. They asked questions, curious about the journey, the dangers faced, and how the woman had survived. She answered patiently, describing the forests, the rivers, and the animals. She spoke of wolves, storms, and hidden paths, and how each challenge required careful thought. The cowboy supported her words, describing their shared efforts and the lessons learned along the way. Together, they painted a picture of cooperation and survival that inspired admiration, even from those who had doubted them. Despite the growing respect, there remained tension. Some villagers were uneasy about the presence of an Apache woman in their settlement, recalling old conflicts and misunderstandings. The woman understood their fears and addressed them with calm, honest words. She explained that her journey had been about survival, not conflict, and that she sought no harm. She emphasized respect for the people and the land, and the importance of understanding rather than fear. Slowly, the villagers began to listen, realizing that her presence was not a threat, but an opportunity to see courage and wisdom in action. The cowboy observed these interactions quietly, He had followed her into the wilderness, guided by instinct and a sense of responsibility. Now he watched as the community began to understand the depth of her experience. He knew that their journey had created a fragile trust between the woman and the settlers, and he hoped it could grow into something more. He also recognized that his own respect and support had strengthened the bond between them, proving that cooperation and understanding could overcome fear and suspicion. Over the following days, the woman worked to establish trust with the community. She helped gather firewood, shared her knowledge of edible plants, and taught others small lessons about survival in the forest. Her skills and calm presence impressed many, and even the most cautious villagers began to see her as a person of strength and intelligence. The cowboy continued to support her, guiding others to understand her journey and emphasizing the importance of respect for her skills and her courage. Slowly, the uneasy tension began to shift toward cautious admiration and respect. One evening, the elders called a meeting. They spoke of the dangers of the wilderness, the challenges of the frontier, and the importance of cooperation between communities. The woman shared her perspective, emphasizing understanding, patience, and respect. She told them that the wilderness taught lessons that could benefit everyone if they were willing to listen. The cowboy added his experience, describing their shared journey and the importance of trust, observation, and careful planning. The discussion was long, thoughtful, and respectful. While not everyone agreed, a sense of possibility began to grow, a small hope that understanding could replace fear. By the end of the meeting, a pact of sorts had formed. It was not a full friendship, nor a complete end to suspicion, but it was a beginning. The elders and the woman agreed to share knowledge and support each other in survival and safety. The cowboy promised to assist where needed, and the villagers acknowledged the lessons of patience, courage, and observation. The pact was fragile, built on mutual respect and shared experience, but it carried the promise of a better understanding between people who had previously been wary of each other. The woman and the cowboy knew that challenges would continue. Not everyone would accept the pact, and the wilderness would always present dangers, yet they also understood that their journey had created something valuable: trust, respect, and the possibility of coexistence. They had faced storms, rivers, wolves, and uncertainty, and they had survived together. Their bond had become a symbol of what could be achieved when courage, wisdom, and cooperation were combined. In the days that followed, the settlement slowly adapted to the presence of the woman. Children learned from her, adults observed her methods, and even skeptics began to respect her experience. The cowboy remained near, quietly supporting her and ensuring that the lessons they had learned together were not forgotten. They worked side by side, teaching and learning, while maintaining vigilance and care. Each day reinforced the fragile but important trust that had been established, showing that understanding and cooperation could bridge gaps created by fear and history. As time passed, the woman reflected on her journey. She had survived alone in the wilderness, faced danger, and trusted another person to help her return. She realized that courage was not only about facing physical challenges, but also about trust, patience, and understanding. The cowboy had proven himself dependable, respectful, and willing to learn. Together, they had navigated a dangerous and unpredictable world, building a bond that neither had expected. The lessons of survival, trust, and respect had created something lasting, something more important than mere safety: understanding. The frontier remained a difficult and unpredictable place, filled with dangers, challenges, and old fears. But the journey of the Apache woman and the cowboy had created hope. It showed that even in a world shaped by suspicion and danger, courage, patience, and respect could open the door to understanding. Their shared experiences reminded everyone that survival was not only about strength, but also about trust, cooperation, and learning from the world and each other. The uneasy pact they had formed was a beginning, a fragile promise that even the most unlikely alliances could lead to something meaningful. In the end, the woman stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land. She felt the weight of her journey, the lessons learned, and the bond formed with the cowboy. Wait. He stood beside her quietly, respecting her space, yet sharing in the moment. Together they had faced the wilderness, survived the unknown, and returned stronger and wiser. Though the world remained uncertain and the frontier was still dangerous, they had proven that courage, wisdom, and cooperation could create hope and understanding, even in the most difficult circumstances. The uneasy pact between them and the community symbolized this truth, a promise that respect and knowledge could guide the way forward in a world that demanded both.